Welcome. I hope you are ready for a little magic today. I am so glad you are with me. Picture yourself standing on the edge of a great forest. The trees are tall, the air is cold and clean. The land in front of you seems to go on forever. There are rivers you cannot see the end of. There are mountains touching the sky. This land is old. Very, very old. And today, we are going to walk through it together. We are going to listen to its story. A story of brave people, long journeys, hard choices, and the land that changed the world. This is the story of Canada. And it begins long before anyone wrote it down. Long ago, before there were cities, before there were ships, before anyone in Europe knew this land existed, people already lived here. They had lived here for thousands and thousands of years. These were the First Nations people, the Indigenous peoples of what we now call Canada. They were not one group, they were hundreds of groups. Each group had its own language, its own stories, its own way of living. Some lived near the ocean and caught fish. Some lived on the great flat lands and followed the buffalo. Some built long wooden houses in the forests of the west. Some made their homes in the frozen north, where the wind never stopped and the ice never fully melted. Each group knew their land deeply. They knew where the animals went in winter. They knew which plants were food and which were medicine. They understood the rivers, the seasons, and the stars. This was not a wild, empty land. It was a homeland, a place full of life, culture, and community. And for thousands of years, these people lived, loved, and built their world here in peace. But far away, across a great ocean, something was beginning to change. And soon, that change would reach these shores. What do you think happened when two completely different worlds finally met? The first people to sail from Europe to this land were not the ones most people think of. They were the Vikings. Around the year 1000, a Viking explorer named Leif Erikson sailed west from Greenland and found a new land. He called it Vinland. We believe today that Vinland was part of what is now the Canadian island of Newfoundland. The Vikings built a small settlement there. We know this because archaeologists found it. They found the remains of old buildings, tools, and fire pits near a place called L'Anse aux Meadows. It is the oldest known European settlement in North America. But the Vikings did not stay long. They had problems with the indigenous people they met. There were fights, there were misunderstandings, and so, after a few years, the Vikings left. The land returned to its first people, and for almost 500 more years, Europe forgot about this place. Or perhaps it never truly knew it was there. The story paused. The forest was quiet again. But not for long. Across the ocean, something powerful was growing. A hunger for gold, for land, for discovery. And that hunger was about to send new ships across the water. In the year 1534, a French explorer named Jacques Cartier set sail from France. He was looking for a new route to Asia. He did not find Asia, but he found something else, something extraordinary. He sailed into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a wide and beautiful body of water on the eastern side of North America. He saw the land. He walked on it. He planted a cross and claimed the land for France. He met the indigenous Iroquois people. At first, there was some curiosity on both sides, but Cartier took 2 of the Iroquois chiefs' sons back to France with him, without asking permission. This was the beginning of a long and painful pattern. Europeans taking from this land without understanding what they were taking, or from whom. Cartier came back 2 more times. He explored the great St. Lawrence River, going deeper and deeper into the land. He found the place where the river narrows. The Iroquois called it Quebec. We know it today as Quebec. He found a large island where a great mountain stood. He called it Mont Royal. We know it today as Montreal. Cartier dreamed of gold and riches, but he did not find them here. He returned to France with stones he thought were diamonds and gold. They were not. They were just rocks. The French laughed at him. But the land he described, the rivers, the forests, the animals, that was real. And France was listening. Many years passed. Then, in 1608, a determined French explorer named Samuel de Champlain arrived in Canada. He was different from Cartier. He did not only want to look, he wanted to stay. He built a small settlement at the place called Quebec. Quebec. It was cold, hard, and dangerous. The winters were long. Food was difficult to find. Many of the first settlers became sick and died, but Champlain did not give up. He learned from the indigenous people around him. He made alliances, friendships, and agreements with groups like the Huron and the Algonquin. He learned to travel by canoe. He explored lakes and rivers that no European had ever seen. He is often called the father of New France. And New France grew slowly, like a small tree in a cold place. More settlers came from France. They built farms along the St. Lawrence River. They traded furs, especially beaver fur, which was very valuable in Europe. This fur trade was the heart of the early Canadian economy, and it connected the French settlers deeply with the indigenous people, who were skilled hunters and traders. For a time, this world worked. But Canada was big, and France was not the only country watching. While the French were building New France, the British were also coming to North America. They settled further south in what became the United States, but they also moved north. They wanted the same things the French wanted: land, fur, trade, and power. And so, slowly, the 2 great empires began to compete. There were wars in Europe, and those wars crossed the ocean to Canada. The French and the British fought many times on Canadian soil. Indigenous nations were pulled into these conflicts. Many chose sides, not always freely. The wars were long and costly. Then came the year 1759. This year changed everything. A British general named James Wolfe led his soldiers to the cliffs below the city of Quebec. It seemed impossible to climb. The cliffs were very high. The French general, Montcalm, believed the city was safe. But Wolfe found a small, hidden path up the cliff. In the early morning darkness, his soldiers climbed quietly. By dawn, the British army stood on the Plains of Abraham, just outside Quebec City. The battle that followed lasted only about 15 minutes. But those 15 minutes changed the history of Canada forever. Both generals, Wolfe and Montcalm, were wounded during the battle. Both died from their wounds, and New France fell to Britain. After the British took control of Quebec in 1759, something interesting happened. Something that makes Canada different from almost every other country in the world. The British could have forced the French settlers to give up their language, their religion, and their way of life. Many empires did this. But Britain chose a different path. In 1774, they passed a law called the Quebec Act. This law allowed the French people in Canada to keep their language, French. It allowed them to keep their Catholic religion. It allowed them to keep their own legal traditions. This was unusual. It was not perfect. The Indigenous peoples received no such protection. But for the French Canadians, it was a kind of survival. And so Canada became a place with two official peoples, two languages, two ways of seeing the world. This duality, this two-ness, is still one of the most important parts of Canadian identity today. French and English, two rivers running side by side, sometimes calm together, sometimes in conflict, but always part of the same land. This is the story that Canada carries inside it, and there is still much more to discover. A few years after the fall of New France, something happened to the South that sent thousands of new people north into Canada. In 1776, the American colonies declared independence from Britain. A great revolution began. But not everyone in America wanted independence. There were people, called Loyalists, who remained loyal to the British king. When the Americans won their revolution, these Loyalists were no longer welcome in the new United States. Many of them lost their homes, their businesses, and their communities. And so, they moved north. Tens of thousands of Loyalists came to Canada, to Nova Scotia, to New Brunswick, and to what is now Ontario. They built new towns. They cleared new land. They brought with them a strong sense of British identity and tradition. Canada was growing in a new direction. It was becoming more English in some parts and remaining deeply French in others. The land was being shaped by people from many places. But the first peoples of this land, the Indigenous nations, were being pushed further and further aside. Their lands were taken. Their children were sometimes taken too, forced into schools far from their families, forbidden from speaking their own languages. This is one of the darkest parts of Canada's story, and it is important to listen to it, to understand it, and not to forget it. By the middle of the 1800s, the separate British colonies in North America, Canada East, Canada West, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, began to talk to each other. There were problems. The United States was growing powerful. There were fears of American expansion northward. The colonies needed to be stronger together. And so, political leaders began to dream of something new, a united Canada. There were long meetings and difficult conversations. There were disagreements, but slowly, an agreement was reached. On July 1st, 1867, the Dominion of Canada was born. This was Confederation. It was not full independence from Britain. Canada still had strong ties to the British Crown. But it was a new kind of nation. It had its own government, its own parliament, its own laws. The first Prime Minister of Canada was a Scottish-born politician named John A. Macdonald. He was complicated, brilliant in some ways, deeply flawed in others. He helped build the nation, but he also caused great harm to Indigenous and Chinese people through his policies. Canada's history is not simple. It is full of beauty and full of pain. And understanding both is part of learning its true story. After Confederation, Canada needed something to hold it together. The country was enormous, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean in the east toward the vast, unmapped west. British Columbia, far away on the Pacific coast, agreed to join Canada, but only if a railway was built to connect it to the east. And so began one of the greatest construction projects in Canadian history, the Canadian Pacific Railway. Thousands of workers came from China to build this railway. They worked in dangerous conditions. They blasted through mountains, crossed deep valleys, and laid tracks across thousands of kilometers of wilderness. They were paid much less than white workers. Many died. Canada's history of the railway cannot be told honestly without telling their story too. The railway was completed in 1885. A small golden spike was hammered into the ground in a place called Craigellachie in British Columbia. Canada was now connected from one side to the other. Settlers moved west. Towns grew. Prairie farms appeared where there had been only grass and sky. The West was changing. But for the Indigenous peoples of the plains, this change meant loss. The buffalo, which had been central to their way of life for generations, were nearly gone. The land they had always lived on was now divided and claimed by others. A chapter of great suffering had begun. And the world kept turning. In 1914, the world went to war. Because Canada was still connected to Britain, it entered the First World War. More than 600,000 Canadians served. Over 60,000 died. They fought in terrible battles in Belgium and France, at Ypres, at Vimy Ridge. The Battle of Vimy Ridge in 1917 was a turning point, not just militarily, but emotionally. For the first time, all 4 Canadian divisions fought together as one force. They succeeded where others had failed. For many Canadians, Vimy Ridge was the moment Canada truly became a nation, not just a British colony, but its own proud country. Then, in 1939, the world went to war again. Canada entered the Second World War, and once again, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, nurses, and workers served. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Canadian soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy in France. They fought bravely. They liberated towns and cities. The people of the Netherlands, in particular, never forgot Canadian soldiers. They still honor Canada every year with tulips sent as a gift of gratitude. Through war, through loss, through sacrifice, Canada found its voice. It walked into the 20th century as a new kind of nation, quiet in its confidence, strong in its values, and beginning to understand who it truly wanted to be. And so we arrive at the Canada of today, a vast, cold, beautiful country that is still, in many ways, becoming itself. Canada is known around the world for its politeness, its multiculturalism, its open doors. It is a country that has welcomed millions of immigrants from every corner of the earth. People from Asia, from Africa, from the Middle East, from the Caribbean, from Europe. They all came, and they all helped build something new. But Canada also knows that it has much work still to do. The story of the Indigenous peoples, of the land taken, the languages silenced, the children separated from their families in residential schools, is a wound that has not fully healed. Canada is learning to listen, to acknowledge, to try to make things right. And that work, slow and difficult as it is part of the story too. Canada teaches us something important. A country, like a person, is never finished. It makes mistakes, it learns, it grows. It carries its past with it while trying to walk towards something better. And perhaps that is the real lesson of this journey. We are all, every one of us, still becoming, still learning, still listening. And that is not a weakness. That is the most human thing of all. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Canada's story. I hope you felt the cold air of those forests. I hope you heard the river. If this story opened something in you, a curiosity, a question, a love for learning, then write it in the comments below. Tell me what moved you. Tell me what you want to learn next. This is your journey too. And here on Storyline English, there is always another story waiting for you.